I grew up outside of Chicago on the south side, so a couple of the south side suburbs. When I was 5, I moved a little bit further into the suburbs because my mom had a flower shop. So we moved closer to be there. And that kind of is what shaped a little bit of my independence now, I think. I was always at her flower shop, like after school, on the weekends. And people would come in and I'd be like working the register as a 7-year-old, be a little alarmed, but it was something that allowed me to be independent, you know, and also get experience with customer service and just dealing with people initially. And then my dad, he's a police officer, so I kind of grew up with him being a little bit of like a monitor, like a safety monitor. So it wasn't really until I became maybe 12 or so years old that I learned more about what exactly it is that he does. And he was very involved in like going into schools. He did the DARE program, which has been proven to not be effective. But he also was head of this group called Peer Jury, which is restorative justice for people who are under 18 who commit misdemeanor crimes. And so I actually ended up joining Peer Jury when I was in 6th grade and did it all the way until I was a senior in high school, which is where I feel like I kind of got my start in terms of activism, and just learning how corrupt some of the court systems can be, especially living in Cook County, Illinois. Like, it's a very backed up court system, and it's not effective at all. And so one of the things I learned from doing Peer Jury and talking to my dad about these things is how there's no sort of, like, you don't learn from your actions when you go to court, especially if you're a kid, since kids are so influential. So that was one thing that really helped kind of spark my interest. And then I just started reading a lot more about different types of like activism in terms of like prison reform. And then I started getting more into environmental justice. And I got into that from, in 6th grade, I had a teacher who was my science teacher, who's actually a good friend of mine now. And she just very much so taught every class in like, you should live your life to the fullest, you should respect the people around you. Her name was Dana Belucas, and Dana, she was just awesome. Like, everyone loved to be in her class, whether we were actually doing science work or not. She always took time out of the day to make sure that everyone was okay, and you could tell that she like very much so cared about people understanding the earth and like why it's important that we give back to it. So she encouraged me to join the Environmental and Outdoor Adventure Club, which as a 6th grader, I was like, oh, that's all like older kids. I don't really know if I want to do that. But I ended up getting one of my best friends at the time to join it with me, and just learning a little bit about nature here and there exposed me more to the problems that we're having with nature. So I was always able to kind of talk to her, and her and my best friend Allison actually were 2 big influences in why I became a vegetarian. That and watching a few documentaries on Netflix in high school. So when I was in high school, I started getting more involved with like the research behind the climate justice movement. It was just something that I feel like it was my space. You hear that a lot in activism, like you can show up and be a body, but also make sure that you're not taking someone's space that doesn't belong to you. And so I feel like the climate justice movement is a space where I belong, and I'm not taking anyone's voice, but I'm also allowing other people to like bring their voices as well. So I started doing a lot more research with environmental justice, and when I came to AU, I was still interested in it, but I didn't really know my place. And I decided to go to this event hosted by 350.org, which is a huge climate justice movement. They also push for fossil fuel divestment. And so when I went, the main draw was that Bernie Sanders was speaking, and then a couple other people who were really cool were also speaking. And And that's the first time I heard of what divestment really was. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I swam for 15 years prior to that, so a very long time in my life. And I ended up actually quitting the swim team sophomore year of high school to join the speech and debate team, because one of my English teachers told me that he thought that I would be interested in it. It seemed like something that I would be good at because I always have kept up with the news and current events. And so being in that, I did extemporaneous speaking, which is like, you pull 3 political questions, you get 45 minutes to prep a 6-minute speech, and you basically have to have like sources backing up your answer to the question. So that kind of drove me towards current events and got me more interested. And that's kind of what drew me to AU, because prior to being on the speech team, I was like, I want to go to law school. I don't really know why. It could have something to do with my background with peer jury and restorative justice. But it wasn't until I started speech that I realized, like, I'm actually really interested in current events and what's going on and how the world works. So that's why I came to AU, was because of the International Studies program here. But even still then, I didn't know 100% that I wanted to go into a focus in environmental sustainability and global health. What kind of drew me to that was the structure of the School of International Studies is that you have to take 3 different gateway courses within your major in order to declare officially what you want your focus to be. And so Professor Malini Ranganathan was a big part of that decision for me. Just the energy that she brought to the class and the way that she...
And what class was that?
So that was the Environmental Sustainability and Global Health Gateway. And the way that she talked about things and the passion and power she had behind what she was speaking about really kind of drew me in even more to the aspect, not just of the environment, but how the environment and what we're doing to it impacts people around the world. Yeah, so my journey with Fossil Free AU actually started at the 350.org rally, which was at George Washington University. And I ran into this girl who actually lived next to me freshman year. And she was saying, oh, like, I'm part of this organization, Fossil Free AU, you're here, so we clearly have similar climate interests, so you should come. And of course, I didn't have anyone to go with. I was kind of scared. So I ended up going to my first meeting and was so intimidated because everyone was throwing around these big words I had never heard of. I always knew that fossil fuels were bad. I just couldn't exactly explain why. But after going to the first meeting and then coming back for the next few meetings, I felt like my voice was really valued. And it was also a space where I could say, like, hey, I don't understand this. Can someone explain this to me? And it was an environment where everyone wanted you to learn why you're fighting for what you're fighting for. So after that, I just really kind of clicked with the people in it. I think that in college, one of the best things about being in college is that you're friends with people who are genuinely interested in the same things you are, instead of high school where you kind of just have friends because you grew up together. So I guess what drew me to the event and what basically drew me to Bernie Sanders, going back to my high school speech days, my coach for that extemporaneous speaking event, he was very passionate about political knowledge and really knowing when you're giving a speech, knowing your stance, knowing why that's your stance. So that was a time when the 2016 elections were coming up, and I would have been 18 by the general elections, so I was able to vote. And so that kind of sparked my interest. I was like, well, I need to know who I'm going to vote for, and I need to know why I'm going to vote for them. Because there's so many times when you ask an adult, oh, why did you vote for them? Oh, because it's not this person. And you're like, well, that's not an issue. I don't know. I'm all about the issues. And so it just so happened that when I did all this research, I started learning more about Bernie Sanders, and I also had an upperclassman on the speech team who started kind of guiding me, teaching me, exposing me to different names. And it wasn't until I was a junior in high school that I got a text from a friend who goes to, she's on the newspaper for a high school nearby, and was like, Bernie Sanders is hosting a surprise rally at this high school. You need to be there. And so, of course, I texted my mom. This was like second period in high school. I was like, please call me out of school. I need to be there. Like, please, 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 please. So I ended up going with my brother, who was a senior at the time, so a year older than me. And we waited in line for forever. And I just remember I had these little like blue Bernie Sanders pins, and I like put one on my brother. We ended up running to the mall beforehand so he could get a shirt because he needed to show his support, which was really cute. And so we both were wearing these pins, and I got a text from my high school speech coach saying that his wife was working on the Bernie campaign in Chicago. And he's like, if you're waiting in line, like go somewhere warm. Of course, this is March in Chicago. It was freezing. Go somewhere warm. Come meet me at this door at this time. We'll get you in like a really good spot instead of just general admission. I was like, go somewhere warm? Perfect. I'm freezing. So we ended up meeting him and getting to stand behind where Bernie Sanders was speaking. And then I checked my phone later that night and saw a bunch of people like send me Snapchats. You're on TV. You're right behind Bernie Sanders. Like all of these crazy things. And so just listening to him talk and being that close to him, I actually got to shake his hand, which was really cool. But being that close and really feeling the way that he felt and feeling his emotions and everyone's emotions in the room kind of drew me closer to him and the climate justice movement as well. So going back to the 350.org event, I was like, oh, another chance to see Bernie Sanders and now see him like in action with other people. I'm sure I can learn something from this event. So I went to that event, got involved with Fossil Free AU, and became pretty good friends with a lot of the people in it. And then that was my second semester of freshman year. So I wasn't involved first semester. I was still kind of trying to find my place, as most people do. And then coming back sophomore year, I was like, I'm ready. I like want to get more involved in this movement. And so I was very grateful to have some of the upperclassmen still being able to teach me and also saying like, you can push yourself. You can do more research. You can, you can really become passionate about this. So Gracie Brett was one of those people who kind of pushed me to be more involved. And if I didn't get involved in Fossil Free, I probably wouldn't be as involved in the climate justice movement as a whole either. So Fossil Free AU is a divestment campaign that's completely student run. And our goal is to get the university to divest its endowment from fossil fuels. So right now, it's kind of hard to get the actual numbers since American University is a private institution. But with a little bit of pressuring some people and sending a lot of emails, we basically found out that we have $18.8 million invested in fossil fuels, which is indirectly invested. So AU doesn't choose, hey, we're going to give all our money to Exxon or, BP or whatever. They basically give it to a hedge fund to kind of manage, and they do all of the placing of the money. However, talking to AU officials about it, they always make the argument that they can't divest their money from fossil fuels because they aren't the ones who technically manage the money. There's a lot of like financial nitty-gritty that really confuses people, so I'll refrain from that. But essentially, they can divest it, and they can choose to put that money into a green fund. It would just cost them money to take the money out, which makes sense because when you have a bank account and you're trying to close it with like a big bank, you still have to like pay money, or you always have to keep a certain amount of money in that bank account. So it makes sense the way that they tell us about things. But right now, the university's stance is that they don't want to divest from fossil fuels because a university is there to educate people, and it's not there to take a political stance on anything. So one of our arguments is that divestment isn't a political stance. It's about saving the planet for future generations, and you're not going to have anybody to educate if there's nowhere for us to live. So that is pretty much what Fossil Free AU is. We put pressure on the university and specifically the Board of Trustees because they're the ones who vote on divestment. But we also work with other campaigns in the Maryland, Virginia, DC area. And then I'm also recently just joined the National Escalation Strategy Team, which is through DivestEd. And so we have calls usually every 1 or 2 weeks to make sure that everyone's on the same page for this National Day of Escalation, which is in February. So we've done a few different things. We did a letter writing campaign a few years back where we just asked students and members of our organization to write letters to the Board of Trustees explaining why divestment is important, or just in a broader sense, why climate justice is important. Because I think our generation is very committed to seeing a change in the way that the earth is being shaped, especially because we're going to be the ones that are impacted the most by it. So the letter writing campaign was successful in that it brought attention to the Board of Trustees that this is an issue that we care about. But a lot of times people that we see on the quad, like if we're tabling or we're doing an event, we did an event for Earth Day last year where we just had a big banner and wanted everyone to write why they need the earth, how climate change affects them, stuff like that. And everyone's biggest comment is that they don't want to get involved with divestment because they think that the endowment gives them financial aid, and they don't want to take financial aid away from people, which is not true. So that's one thing that we're trying to educate people about. But one thing that I have found from going and speaking on other fossil-free campaigns, like panels and stuff, is that if you just start to teach people about climate justice and climate change and why it's important, then you can kind of open the door for them to be like, and this is also a really big issue. So hopefully that kind of steers the Board of Trustees into making that decision, especially on the tails of the University of California school systems choosing to divest, which I believe was an $83 billion divestment from fossil fuels. So very big. But they're also a way bigger school system than AU. So hopefully that puts the pressure on them a little bit. I recently, in May of last semester, I went to Towson University in Baltimore to speak on a panel because they were interested in starting a divestment campaign. And so they just hosted this, it was kind of, we call it a teach-in. So what is climate justice? Why is it important? And then they had me from Fossil Free AU and then a couple people from Johns Hopkins divestment campaign, which is called Refuel Our Future. And then they also had Gracie Brett from DivestEd come and speak. And so basically just talked about the success and some of the pitfalls of campus organizing. And so going off that, just making sure, so some of our things that we do besides on-campus activism is the climate strike was just last Friday. So we tried to make sure that everybody had access to get to the event. We also drafted a template that students could send to their professors if they had class saying this is why I'm missing class, this is why it's important to me, I hope that you can excuse my absence. Because I know, especially for a lot of freshmen, I was this way as well. I was really scared to miss class. So we were at the climate strike and actually met up with people from Refuel Our Future from Johns Hopkins. And a lot of times whenever we have a big movement that we know we're going to need a lot of people there, we'll reach out to our coalition of people in the DMV area. I know Johns Hopkins reached out to us last semester when they were doing their sit-in in their library for to go against ICE and deportations. So we kind of not only are fighting for the divestment campaign, but also just making sure that there's social justice everywhere. Because I think there's a big intersectionality between environmental justice, racial equality, all of the different kinds of justice, like social justice that there is. And then, yeah, like just power in numbers is so important because I think a lot of times, especially with the Board of Trustees, they're not going to listen until they see that there's a ton of students who are really passionate and really want change. I think, especially this semester with a lot of our core members abroad or with a couple who have just graduated, it's been particularly frustrating kind of to re-engage people. A lot of people are really frustrated, and I feel like that just happens with activism a lot. It's always hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel when the tunnel is so long. And so I kind of describe being an activist like a wave. Like there's times when you're really, really excited and you're passionate and you're ready to go. And then you get told no so many times that you're in a lull and you're like, well, I can't go anywhere from here. And then that turns into, okay, well, how can I change this? Like, how can I do better and become more passionate? And for me, whenever I get into that lull, what makes me more passionate is like talking to other campaigns or reading certain news articles about places that have divested or countries that have divested. It's funny, I was actually in a lull last semester a little bit and a little upset. And I was coming back from visiting my brother in Germany. And in the airport, I saw a girl with an orange pin on her backpack. And the orange pin's like the national symbol for divestment. So I just tapped her on the shoulder. I was like, oh, I see your orange pin. Are you involved with the divestment movement? And so just talking to her and having that like short interaction really got me like jazzed to start researching again, figuring out, okay, like these are the things we've done that haven't worked. These are some of the things we've done that have caused a little bit of success. Now, where can we go from here to really push the envelope? Sometimes I'll text my friends and just say like, any good articles you guys have, or I'm on this Slack channel called the Power Shift Network. And so I'll sometimes go on there and just look at what people have posted. Sometimes it's with fossil fuel divestment. Other times it's with like prison reform, things like that. Just things that kind of get me inspired that there are little victories and like you do have to celebrate all of those little victories. And just knowing that you're still a part of a movement that could be so important, not just for our future, but for the future of so many other people who aren't even alive yet. Yes, so AU's carbon neutrality, although a lot of people hear like carbon neutral, they think it's a great thing. They hear sustainable, they think that's a great thing. The reality is that it's kind of greenwashing. And what I mean by greenwashing is that you see a product on a shelf and it says eco-friendly. What does that actually mean? Not much. Really not much. And so with AU's carbon neutrality, when it first came out, we did a lot of research trying to figure out what that meant, where we're subsidizing our carbon from. And what carbon neutrality basically means is that you're not really reducing the amount of carbon that you're emitting. You're just purchasing carbon offsets from places that don't emit a lot of carbon. That's one of the ways that carbon neutrality works. So it's not 100% like we're really reducing our consumption and we're really trying to be better. It's just a means of using your money to buy a title, if that makes sense. And so I think it is great that AU is trying to implement, solar panels and climate-controlled rooms, the new pipes that they're putting in all over the quad. However, it's not enough. And it's also not doing much at all either. One of the things that I really wanted to touch on is that the difference between individual action versus corporate accountability. And so that's one thing that I think the divestment movement really pushes. Because you can say from a privileged point of view that you should eat less meat, that you should ride your bike, etc. But if you don't have the funds to become a vegan, or you don't have the weather to ride a bike everywhere, or to, shop at Whole Foods or use recycled bags or what have you, it's not on you, and it shouldn't be on you, because as an individual, you're not doing as much as the corporations are to destroy the earth. And so that's one thing that I think the fossil fuel industry is really doing, like they are very much so a huge component of climate change. And so, yes, I personally am a vegan, but I choose to do that, and I choose my individual actions as well as trying to hold corporations accountable. So I just think that AU as an institution trying to take this stance of carbon neutral and sustainable, if they're saying that they want those things, then why not push the envelope further and also make sure that you're sealing the deal? Like you're really proving that you want the globe to be safe for future generations. So within Fossil Free AU, originally we were a horizontal leadership organization, and what that means is that there is no executive board, there's no president, vice president, treasurer. It's very much so a democracy, and so we all vote on issues. It doesn't matter if you're coming to a meeting for the first time or you've been there for 2 years, everyone has an equal vote. And so last semester we kind of took the idea of horizontal leadership because on paper it sounds amazing, but it's also a great way to get nothing done. And so we tried to revamp it and keep it still as equal as possible, but initiate heads or directors of a few different working groups. So currently I am the director of research and also the director of outreach. And then we also have a director of communications who does a lot of like our social media campaigns and make sure that we have graphics and that our flyers that we post up are pretty and draw the attention of people. So that's kind of the organization. I've always kind of, when I get involved in something, I'm a little quiet, I'm a little nervous. I don't want to say my opinion right away for the sake of like offending people. And then I found that the friends I have here are very much so enforce you to, it doesn't matter if you offend someone, like get your point out there, like you might really be able to change the way that something is done. So when speaking with Gracie, Brett, kind of just, we very much so run our ideas off of each other and really like fuel each other up. And so I remember actually a couple semesters ago, I was talking with her and a few other friends, and I always have these moments every semester where I'm like, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm in DC. This is why I'm fighting this fight. And it was a talk about climate justice, and we had a couple people who were saying that like they don't have the privilege to care about the environment because they need to make sure that they're paying their rent, that they're paying their tuition. And so it was kind of a very open dialogue, a learning experience. And from that moment on, I was like, I have the privilege to be in this position, to take a stance, and I'm willing to fight for those who don't, to make a change. And so I was always interested in how I could do that. And that's how the research portion came involved, is the how. I needed to know what I was saying was backed up by fact, and just kind of knowing and understanding a little bit more. So that way when I get into arguments with people like the Board of Trustees, I can refute what they're saying by understanding the literature that's presented and the science that's presented behind climate change. The reasons that I chose to go to school here was because of the activism atmosphere in terms of striking, having a presence, on Capitol Hill, in front of the White House, wherever the organizers of the protest want it to be. And so stepping off the metro stop in Judiciary Square and seeing how many people were waiting to start the walk to the Capitol was just a moment to remember. I think it's important to see the demographics of people that were there. It was a very diverse group of people. I actually was very touched when I saw a lot of older people there, because I've heard the argument from a lot of older people that, they're not going to be around for much longer. They don't really care. It's up to us. And that's one of the most infuriating things I can hear. I actually heard there was a lot of little kids there as well. And I heard a couple people saying like, oh, it's so nice to see these kids because the future's in their hands now. And that is just infuriating to me, because it's like, if we just keep passing the torch on and on and on, nothing's going to happen. We're not going to make that change, because, it is important that children are involved, but we have the power to vote, we have the power to protest, we have the knowledge and the experience to be able to kind of lead a movement as well. And it should be an intersectional movement with ages as well. You know, grab people who are older, people who are younger, anyone that you can in order to make that change. And so at the climate strike, it was really inspiring to see that demographic of people and just the amount of schools that were there that took field trips. That's something that, going back to my past, Dana Belucas would have taken us in 6th grade science to whatever climate strike, and made sure that we had a presence. So I just thought that was very inspiring. And then when we finally got to the Capitol and started hearing people speak, I just couldn't help but be very like caught up in everything, and then just realize what you're fighting for. And I think that's one of the big things in the climate movement and in any sort of activist movement, is that there's not one person who's the face of the campaign. And it's important to know that it should never be one person. It's very much so everybody's learning and like piggybacking off of each other, and you can have small disagreements, but it's important that we all come together and share those ideas. And I really saw that on Friday at the climate strike. I guess what I just would like people to know and people to be aware of is that no matter what, like, you have to have a passion for something. Find that passion and be able to run with it. Some people find that passion earlier in life than others, or they might change. But for me, environmental justice is something that I just couldn't imagine my life without. And once you find that passion, don't take no for an answer. Because if you can see a problem and you can propose solutions on how to fix it, it's important that your voice is heard no matter what. And at this point, I'm sick and tired of hearing no from politicians or from people who have money but don't know what to do with the money. I'm sick and tired of hearing no, and I think that people should just understand that that's not a reasonable excuse anymore, and to have open dialogue with those people. And, you know, whether you can change their mind or not, as long as you're having a dialogue and educating them with what you know and also listening to what they have to say, if you can hear that other side of the story, it's a lot easier to come at them with different information and perhaps change their mind.